Right. So from polling and politics to pop music. Hi, everyone. My name's Olivia Vane. I work at The Economist in the data team, where I'm an interactive data journalist. So interactive data journalist, what does that mean? We create charts, graphs, maps, information graphics for articles online where we think interactivity is going to add something for the reader. So that might be animating graphics, integrating in other kinds of media, using interactivity to let a reader access more details or see different views on a data set. We'll build charts or maps that we expect to repeatedly update. So for example, like a daily election forecast where we're getting new polls every day, and it then makes sense to generate charts with code so that with each data update, they'll then automatically redraw. But we also create other kinds of visual, interactive journalism online that aren't necessarily data-y, so like 3D modeling or zooming around imagery, interactive timelines or illustration. Really anything where it makes sense to use web development tooling to help tell a story and bring it to life. My background before I joined The Economist is actually in research in the digital humanities. And in this talk, I'm going to give you a behind-the-scenes view on a piece we worked on at the beginning of this year, visualizing data from Spotify. And really, it's a project looking at global tastes in pop music. So this is the article titled "What Spotify Data Show About the Decline of English." And it's all about what language of pop music is being listened to around the world. Is everyone listening to English language American pop? You'll have got a clue from the article title. That's not quite the case. What about K-pop? We hear a lot about the Korean wave. Is that borne out in the data? Or are people listening to something else? At The Economist, we have a section in the weekly print paper called Graphic Detail, which is a full page every issue dedicated to data stories best told visually. This piece started life as a graphic detail page, but there was so much in it that we extended it into a longer, online, interactive extravaganza where you can actually listen to the music too. The story was written by Dolly Seton, a data journalist colleague who's based in the States, who did all the data gathering and analysis. The static graphics were created by a visual data journalist colleague, Rosamund Pierce, and I joined the project to work on the audio interactive, which is what I'm going to focus on, talking about the design process. But this was a very collaborative project, so also thanks to the many other colleagues who contributed to this. So, what does the article say? Dolly gathered data from Spotify on the last 5 years of hits across 70 countries. So that's looking at about 13,000 unique tracks. Based on this streaming data, she found that we can organize countries into 3 groups by what music they listen to. So this clustering analysis looks at what language the lyrics of these hits is in, but also at other factors like whether top hits or popular artists are shared across countries or what the popular genres are. So it's more of a general measure of musical similarity. For those interested, we used a principal components analysis to determine the similarity between countries, and then a k-means clustering to group them. 3 clusters emerged. So firstly, a group of countries listening to English language music. And this includes obvious candidates like the UK, like America and Australia, but also countries like Norway and Portugal, which enjoy English language music. And that's the square marked the top right. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to read the country names, but the slide is so enormous, maybe you can. The second group is the Spanish language group, which includes Spain and also countries in Central and South America. like Peru and Argentina. And these countries are listening to loads of shared music. There's a Spanish pop ecosystem with huge global stars, and that's the bottom left corner where it's particularly dark. So they're very homogenous in taste. And the final group, which we called the local language group, are countries that have a really strong local music culture of their own. And they don't really share musical tastes with anyone else. They're the paler middle group. So, for example, Brazil, France, or Japan. Interestingly, while all the Spanish language countries are sharing lots of music, Brazil and Portugal are not. Perhaps someone who knows more about Portuguese music can tell me what's going on there. It seems strange. That's a good answer. The data show that the dominance of English is in decline across all three groups, and especially in the local language and Spanish language groups. This is perhaps in a similar manner to more films and TV shows in diverse languages creeping into your viewing choices on Netflix. English may have been dominant for some time, but pop in other languages is on the ascent. And by way of an illustration, I imagine many people in the audience have never heard of Bad Bunny. He's a Puerto Rican rapper and singer. He mostly raps in Spanish. And he was most streamed artist on Spotify in 2020 and again in 2021. And that's the first time a non-English act achieved that. Most streamed artist on Spotify in the world. Though there's an interesting question about the nature of this growing diversity. English may be on the decline, but many of the genres it incubated are now widely popular elsewhere. So this data contains, for example, loads of rap in Arabic, in Russian, in Spanish. So English genres have left their mark even if the songs are no longer in English. In the second half of the article, we wanted to create a chart that showed the data we had gathered in a streamlined way so that readers could explore and listen to the songs themselves. But how do you visualize musical tastes across the world in a single chart? So this would be the final design, but how did we get there? There were a few challenges approaching this design. So firstly, scale. There was a lot of data, so over 300,000 data points, which is 13,000 unique songs covering 5 years. So how do you slice that to give an insightful picture of what's going on for readers without leaving them feeling overwhelmed? The second point, narrative. How do you design data graphics for narrative and explanation? And for this project, we wanted to balance narrative elements in a big, explorable interactive. So how can you do both? And then the final point, we have to make interactive designs that work and look good on every screen size. Over half of our readers online are on a mobile device, so we can't just make interactive graphics that are designed only for desktop. We need a design that works on a small screen too. So early on, we experimented with a few different formats. This is maps showing the percentage of hits in English, though these just highlight the countries where Spotify doesn't operate. Line graphs showing the streaming count for each hit over time, colored by language. And I was thinking of an old New York Times piece about box office receipts for films, but these just weren't very interesting. We're beginning to see some patterns, looking at the most streamed artist each year across countries and where that's shared. In this kind of blobby diagram, each of the circles is a country sized by streaming count and then colored by which of the three clusters they belong to. And you can see who was the most streamed artist for these years. We can see that Bad Bunny has pulled in many of the Spanish language countries in 2020 and 2021, and Olivia Rodrigo similarly for the English language cluster last year. Something I learned looking at these in 2020, Lewis Capaldi, if there are any fans of him, was only really a big thing in the UK and Ireland. He wasn't #1 artist anywhere else, which surprised me. But ultimately, we settled on a matrix of the most streamed song each week. So time runs vertically, and each cell is a week. Focusing on the most popular song each week alone reduced the data to a more manageable size. The visualization shows how countries can be divided into the 3 distinct groups depending on their linguistic preferences and tastes in music. So in the Spanish language group, and Spanish songs are in yellow, musical tastes are clearly very homogeneous, and there's little overlap with the other 2 groups. Presenting the data this way also had the advantage of making it apparent which songs managed to cross cultural and linguistic boundaries. In a rough first draft of the matrix, I actually added the first letter of the song name to each matrix cell for the most popular songs so that you can see which hits spread across countries more clearly. And Christmas hits that return every year were traced by adding emojis. So we had stars for Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You, and bells for Wham's Last Christmas. This obviously does not look very pretty, but it was really helpful for being able to spot those kinds of patterns quickly, which then helps us think about how might we design a more elegant way of showing this. You can see the band of S's at the top and left. That's Ed Sheeran's mega hit, Shape of You. And the 2 bands of D's in 2017, that's Despacito. More on that later. Seeing these patterns, we decided to merge neighboring cells that contained the same track to make those crossover tracks easier to spot. We can see the success of Ed Sheeran's Shape of You and Despacito, but there are lots of stories worth highlighting. In this next draft, we added annotations to some of the most successful hits. It was interesting information, but they start to make the chart look cluttered. It's kind of difficult to see which annotation belongs to which bit of the chart. So we'd ended up sort of with an explorable design, but with narrative elements on top of it. This is also a really wide graphic, so how is it going to work on mobile? And we had the annotations coded to disappear when you hovered over the visualization with a cursor, but obviously that doesn't work on mobile because you're not using a mouse. We decided to remove the annotations and instead put that information into the text with some additional graphics above the interactive chart. So these are the 3 stories, and these stack above the interactive. So we separated out the narrative part from the explorable graphic rather than trying to combine the 2. And these were the 3 highlighted stories. So the first one, Despacito. Crossovers can be engineered. Despacito, a huge hit in the Spanish language ecosystem for Luis Fonsi, featuring Daddy Yankee in the early months of 2017, ascended to the top spot in 36 countries elsewhere, thanks to a remix featuring Justin Bieber, the Canadian pop sensation. And I think it's nice. You can very clearly see that the original is only a big hit in the Spanish language group, other than in 2 other countries, and then with the remix, it's suddenly a hit everywhere else. So Justin Bieber is the magic ingredient. The second story, Mariah Carey, and it is now the season, she's back. Christmas is big business in the streaming charts. For that reason, Mariah Carey returns to the most streamed lists seasonally on the strength of her modern-day Christmas classic, All I Want for Christmas Is You. She takes a top spot in 24 countries in the English language group and manages to make incursions into the local language group, for example, in Germany. And this is really the new economics of streaming, and why artists like Bob Dylan have sold their back catalogues in recent years for huge sums, because classic hits now continue to generate streaming income, and suddenly they're worth a lot. And then the last story, BTS. Many of the K-pop bands popular in South Korea managed to achieve global success by mixing in some English. Some simply mix in English words amid their Korean crooning. Others choose an English title, and some do entire songs in English. None has managed the transition as deftly as the boy band BTS, epitomized by their international hit, Boy With Love, done with the American songwriter Halsey. Design, there is an art of compromise. Moving the annotations above the interactive helped simplify the main chart, but it meant then we could only include a small number to keep the article at a reasonable length. So some of our favorite insights didn't make the cut. One is that the Eurovision Song Contest boosts Italian songs. The winner in 2021, Zitti e Buoni, and the runner-up in 2019, Soldi, were the only Italian songs that made it outside Italy in the Matrix. And streaming and social media are also propelling African pop. So Love Nwantiti in English and Igbo, a language in Nigeria, and Jerusalema, a South African track in Zulu, made it to the top in Morocco and Belgium, respectively. Both songs were viral hits on TikTok. Though interestingly, for songs from small labels like Love Nwantiti, which unexpectedly become big viral hits, the artist has less control on being credited in unofficial remixes, which may be how the song goes viral, so their footprint can end up sort of diluted in the data. By moving the stories into separate graphics above, it meant that we could create a separate version of the chart with the three groups stacked on top of each other that worked for mobile. So you've got all the same functionality in this. You can select the different languages, you can play the songs, and a player appears at the bottom of the viewport. One good lesson learned working on this project is exercising data skepticism. We used an automated technique to label the song language, so using Google Translate to auto-identify the language from the written lyrics. But you have to be careful with automated methods like this. While I was working on this, I noticed that the top tracks for Hong Kong and Taiwan were both largely in Cantonese, but they weren't the same tracks. Hong Kong and Taiwan weren't sharing hits. At first, I thought maybe this is something interesting about really strong local music cultures, but as I looked into this more, and I imagine some of you in the audience have figured this out, Cantonese is not the primary language in Taiwan, Mandarin is. And our automated method had mislabeled all of the Taiwanese tracks. I think that it was inferring too much from whether traditional or simplified Chinese characters were used. So always exercise skepticism with data and automated methods. Maybe you found something interesting. Maybe you just found a data error. So I'm very glad we caught that one. One of the most exciting things when we published this piece was seeing readers discovering their own stories in the interactive we built. People found interesting patterns, such as a recent resurgence in cantopop in Hong Kong, and on the right, discussion of the graphic on Catalan Twitter. What does the strong hegemony within the Spanish language group mean for Catalan music? So that brings me to the end. Thank you very much for listening. The article is free to read, so I encourage you to go and have fun exploring pop across the world and listening to the music yourself. I don't know if we have time for questions.
Got time for a couple of questions, yeah. Okay, yeah, we've got time for a couple of questions if anyone has any. Go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about like, the limitations of putting this really interesting analysis into like an article format as a kind of one-shot story. How would you go about, and is there any possibility of turning this into a rolling thing that goes off on a timer every year, or is there a way to turn this into like a recurring story that you could think would be interesting?
Oh, that would be fun. But yes, gosh, it would involve setting up a sort of a scraper to repeatedly go back and collect all of the Spotify data. I think as much as it would be fun, one thing I hadn't anticipated working on this was how difficult it is to check that you have actually got the language of the song right. As I said, we use this automated method, but for the interactive, we had to check that all of the songs we had got the language right, and I had not anticipated how difficult that was going to be. You would think you can just Google it and, but apparently not. So that would definitely be a limitation of, doing it as a rolling thing. There was, a sort of lot of manual work involved in that.
Great. Okay, one more question. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that in terms of the sort of colour categorization, in the end we decided, just because it was such a busy graphic already, that we would colour songs by what the majority language, if it was a mixed language song, but it was definitely that mixed languages was something that we talked about, particularly with the Korean example. So it was something that was pulled out in the story, but there was, I think, just so much going on already in the graphic that we couldn't sort of visually encode it as well.